I'm Kieran and welcome to Lesson 4 of Making Sense of Information Security. Okay, I hope you've recovered from our quick but deep dive into GDPR. I know there's plenty there to keep you occupied, but in this lesson I'm going to broaden things even further and look at the whole regulatory landscape. We're not going to have time to explore in the same depth we went into for GDPR. The idea is just to make you aware of the wider environment that you're working in. And neither should you worry too much about trying to become an expert in the full range of laws, rules and regulations. It's useful to know that they're there and to take some time now and again to read around them, not least to build your own expertise, but also to figure out what applies to your business. You're also going to find that as you build your information security expertise, you're going to become the go-to person in your organisation for all questions around how information can be used. And it can't be a bad thing to have the answers, or at least to know where to look. So, in the last lesson, we went into the question of consent when it comes to sales and marketing databases, and we explored the legitimate interest three-part test to discover if we need consent to add people's details to a database. So let's answer this one definitively. You'll find a lot of people are confused by this, so having a definitive answer up your sleeve is a great way to demonstrate your expertise. GDPR does not require you to have the consent of everybody about whom you store information. As you know, there are several lawful bases for processing personal information, including your own legitimate commercial interest. However, when it comes to sales and marketing, you need to be aware of the Privacy and Electronic Communication Regulations, or PECR, which has been in effect since 2003. PECR is very clear. You do require consent to directly market to individuals, that is, to call or email them with sales or marketing messages. You can make unsolicited phone calls to companies, as long as the company has not registered with either the Corporate Telephone Preference Service for companies or the Telephone Preference Service for individuals, sole traders and partnerships. Whether you source your own contact information for calling or buy it in, it must be checked against both the CTPS and the TPS. And for this reason, you must keep your data fresh and make sure that it's been checked in the last 30 days. And if a company asks you not to call again, you must not call them again. You need, therefore, to maintain a do not call list and make sure fresh data is checked against it. Oh, and by the way, if you're a claims management company, you are specifically barred from making any sales or marketing calls to any individuals, but those guys are much too busy making calls to take a course like this. Now, once you move on from marketing to a company to building a sales/marketing relationship with an individual within that company, you must have consent. So there you have it. You are now one of a very select few in your role who can answer that question. Bear in mind too that in 2018, the Information Commissioner acquired the power to levy fines of up to £500,000, not only on the company, but on the individual directors of companies who flout PECR. So, worth taking seriously. And while we're on the subject of common questions, has anyone asked you yet if GDPR means you must have a long disclaimer below your emails? It doesn't. GDPR has nothing to say about email signatures. However, the Companies Act of 2006, as updated in 2007, does require that all communication from your company, including your emails and your website, must clearly show your company name, your company registration number, the country of registration, and your registered address. And fines for not complying with this can be up to £1,000 a time. So there's no UK or European law that requires your signature to explain questions of copyright, intended recipients, and so on. But it is worth considering that your users might send emails to countries with different laws. There are lots of traps out there. And of course, you'll remember that ignorance is never an acceptable defence if you find yourself on the wrong side of a law. So if you can find the time, there are some other laws that are worth knowing about. And just to remind you again, I'm not suggesting you need to know or even actually read these laws, but it is a good idea to look them up online and read a bit about them. I mentioned in the last session that I was skipping over questions of sensitive personal information and the transfer of personal information outside the EU. If you're concerned about these areas, then you do need to look further at both the GDPR itself and the UK Data Protection Act of 2018. By the way, it's worth looking closely, especially at your cloud service providers, just to make sure that you're not transferring personal information out of the EU without even knowing it. Some other important laws worth knowing about include the Copyright Designs and Patents Act of 1998, the Computer Misuse Act of 1990, the Health and Safety at Work Act of 1974, the Human Rights Act of 1998, the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act of 2000, and the Freedom of Information Act of 2000. As I say, you really don't need to be a lawyer to do this job, but it is good to be aware of some of the legislation that may apply. So I asked in an earlier lesson if you know who is responsible if someone in your office downloads or circulates something which offends someone else. These laws are where you'll find the answer. And it's no bad thing either to know where you stand legally if, for example, your boss asks you to look through one of your users' email accounts or their internet history. I want to have a look now at something that looks like a law or a regulation and is often discussed or presented as if it were. And in fact, just like a law, it can result in fines for companies that fall foul of it. It's not a law though, and it has no statutory backing at all. I'm talking about the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS. Not only is it not a law, it's not even, despite its name, a standard. We'll touch on standards in Lesson 5, but we can mention one characteristic of standards here. They're standard, i.e. consistent. PCI DSS, on the other hand, comes in several different forms, determined by the card issuers. Now, if your organisation doesn't take payments by card, you won't necessarily have come across PCI DSS. But as I'll explain in a moment, it's worth knowing about anyway. If you do take payment by card, you will know about it, and the precise hoops you'll have had to jump through depend on your transaction volume. PCI DSS is really a set of instructions for securing a computer network. It's developed by groups of payment card companies such as Visa, MasterCard and American Express, and it's enforced by the card issuers and payment processors, the banks. If you do accept payment by card, your acquiring bank, that is the bank that processes your transactions, will periodically require you to complete a questionnaire attesting to the security precautions you've taken on your network. And if you have a payment terminal, the bank will also insist that you allow them to conduct regular external vulnerability scans. My advice to companies subject to PCI DSS is always the same. If you've one or more card payment terminals, put them on their own separate network with its own internet connection. Entirely separate to your computer network and internet connection, the cost of this will be more than covered by the lower transaction charges in having a compliant network, albeit one to which only payment terminals are attached. And always answer the questionnaire honestly. A lot of people tend to fill it in with half-truths and hope for the best. The problem is that if you suffer a loss because criminals manage to access your terminal or your payment data, and you've been less than entirely truthful on that questionnaire, you, rather than the bank, are likely to bear the loss. You need to remember that PCI DSS is there to protect the banks and card issuers, not you, your company, or your customers. Okay, so what if you don't take payment cards? Why should you care about PCI DSS? First of all, if you don't take card payments, thanks for bearing with me while I focused on those who do. But more importantly, despite the fact that I don't really like the way PCI DSS is often presented as if it were a law or a standard, in fact, it's quite useful if you do treat it as a standard, in the sense that it provides fantastic guidance on network security, and you can download it for free. And not just the rules, you can also find a wealth of equally free supporting material, explaining precisely what needs to be done to meet PCI DSS requirements and covering both technical and policy-based controls. So whether you take payment cards or not, PCI DSS can be a great resource for you. These bankers, after all, are serious about protecting themselves, and to do that, they want to make sure their cards are used on secure networks. Another useful source of information for you is any professional bodies to which your firm might belong. I haven't come across any professional bodies that have explicit security requirements for membership, but most seem to make recommendations. For example, I'm aware that the Solicitors Regulation Authority, the Law Society, the Royal Institute of British Architects, the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, the Recruitment and Employment Confederation, and the National Association of Estate Agents all provide specific guidance to their members in terms of improving their information security. And now, as part of today's homework, you should determine whether your professional body provides such guidance, and if so, what their advice is. The worksheet also aims to help you to start to map out the legal and regulatory framework in which your organisation is operating. So enjoy the homework and see you soon for our 5th and final lesson. Thanks for watching. Bye.